I didn't grow up around addiction, but by the time I was 19, I was an IV heroin user, in and out of prison, living in a halfway house. But I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about that. I want to talk about finding a new way to live.
All right, that was tonight's guest, Tracy Struckman. I'm Daniel Unmanageable, and this is Hard Knox Talks, coming at you from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Treaty Number 6 territory, and the traditional homeland of the Métis people. Let's bring in Tracy. Hello, hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me, you guys.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for coming. Is there anything that you'd like to say before we jump in tonight?
Thank you guys for having me. I'm a really big fan of the podcast, and I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. All right, well, let's go.
This is Hard Knox Talks.
All right, before we jump in, I'd just like to let our viewers and listeners know that tonight's live production is sponsored in part by Stronger Together Canada, peer-led support groups by Mum Stop the Harm, and the Elizabeth Fry Society of Saskatchewan. So, when you were early in recovery, you worked in a factory, and you were a waitress, and you hated it. And it was interesting that part of the conversation that we had before stood out to me, because I myself too have felt stuck in recovery, and I don't know if Donna can relate or not, but
Absolutely.
yeah. So why don't we start there? How did you end up working in a factory and as a waitress?
Oh, finding work as a felon, 0 out of 10. I do not recommend it to anybody. It was an awful, awful experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when I got out of prison in 2014, and I had multiple felonies on my record, and I could not find a job anywhere. I went for a very long period without work. I had the most awkwardest, awful interviews ever. And then when I did finally find work, the only work that I could find was factories and restaurants. And yes, I hated every minute of it.
Like, how long did you work there before you decided, like, this sucks, I'm going to take some chances?
I was actively applying at other places, but I was just not getting callbacks. Or, like I said, I would go to interviews and they would just be so atrocious. Like, every time somebody would ask me about my past, I wanted to hide it. So I felt incredibly embarrassed, and I just kind of clammed up and probably seemed really awkward. And so those interviews did not go well, and I never got a job out of them. Also, don't ever try to lie during an interview. It doesn't work out either.
You got caught?
Well, yeah. Typically, they always do a background check nowadays, right? So you can't put on there and say you're not a felon, because they're going to find out. Don't do that.
Yeah. So you're now passionate about carrying a message of hope. In fact, you're a therapist and a social worker now. And one of the things you wanted to make sure that we touched on tonight, and we're going to go back and talk a little bit about your past, and not too much, but just to build some context. But before we do, why did you want to make sure that we talked about breaking cycles of relapse, breaking cycles of addiction, and breaking cycles of family?
I feel like so many people get stuck either in the cycle of addiction and also in their recovery, just in lives that they are not happy with in general. So you get into recovery and you're doing well, but you never really move forward. That career that you used to want, you gave up on because you have felonies now or whatever. Or you get clean and you do well and then you relapse. Get clean and do well and then relapse. And you're stuck in that cycle for forever. So I just feel like doing things a different way and taking that time to really grow and get to know yourself and make those changes in your life is what breaks that cycle. I mean, creating a life for yourself that you wake up grateful as fuck for every day, that is what is going to break that cycle. And I feel like it's really important that people understand what that requires in early recovery.
How did you learn that for yourself? when you were still actively using? Were you constantly stepping into these cycles yourself? And like particularly with family, why are you so passionate about breaking cycles with family? Like what are your experiences that brought you to the passion to carry that message?
Well, so that actually came from more of things that I have dealt with my other family members and people that I have been in relationships with. And I have seen these cycles of generational trauma, essentially, which is when a trauma that a family goes through, which could be substance abuse or a death or anything, basically gets carried down through generations, and those cycles repeat themselves over and over again through generation after generation. So just focusing on breaking cycles, both of your addiction and if you are stuck in that family cycle as well, learning how to live life in a different way.
So how did you get into, like I said earlier, you're a therapist and a social worker. Like how long into recovery were you before you decided to go to school for those things?
I actually enrolled in school before I even left the halfway house. I didn't know at the time that I was going to be a therapist, but I knew that I wasn't going to be able to find work with felonies on my record, and I had a child to support. So I knew that I had to go to school. I knew I had to do something to be able to get a better job. And the further I went, the more I realized that this is what I need to do, because I remember feeling so incredibly hopeless in my addiction and in my early recovery. And I wanted people to know that you're not stuck in this place forever. It doesn't have to be that way.
So speaking of in your addiction, why don't we take a few minutes and go back and, give us a little context. What was it like growing up for you?
Growing up was great for me. I do not come from a family with addiction. I don't come from, a bunch of trauma or anything like that. I really had a great childhood, but I was always a very sensitive person. I always really struggled with my self-esteem, my self-worth. I always struggled with fitting in and with not feeling good enough. That was my biggest thing. I just never felt good enough. And so I think I was subconsciously looking for a place to fit in, and I found it in that world. I don't know if I so much felt like I fit in, or if I felt like I didn't have to care if I fit in anymore at that point. But that's what I found in the world of drugs. And I started getting involved at 13, 14 years old. And by the time I was 19, using heroin, I had been suspended from school multiple times. I crashed a car intoxicated. It was a very bad car accident. By 20, I was arrested for the first time, and I went on to be arrested 7 more times also.
Wow. So tell us about the first time you got loaded. Was it like you found your way home? Like, what was it? Was it great? Was it terrible? Like, tell us about it.
I think that when you're in the moment, like the first time that you get high or get loaded, you realize that peace that it brings to you. You find that contentment, but it's not until a little later on when you're struggling and you think back on that and you're like, okay, I need this now. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think I realized in that moment how this was going to turn out for me, but a little bit down the road, like when I was having a hard day and feeling sad and struggling and trying to numb that, that's when I thought back and was like, you know what? I need something stronger. I need to do this now. And that is when I knew, like, all right, this is going to be a problem.
Yeah. So tell us about the day, or maybe not the day, but the time that you finally decided, I mean, with all of the trouble that you've just described that you'd gone through, tell us about the time where you made the decision to finally take recovery seriously.
So at the end of 2013, I was actually living in a cellar because I was on the run from arrest warrants. And I got arrested and I got sentenced to a year in prison. So I did my time in prison, and then I was court mandated to complete a program at a halfway house. And while I was there, I became pregnant for the first time. And at first, I was terrified and very upset. I didn't want children, and also I was living in a halfway house. I mean, how was I going to provide for this child? So I was upset, and everybody else was very concerned as well. But as the months went on, I began to bond with my son, and I promised him there in that halfway house that he would never see that side of me. He would never live in a house with addiction.
And that's true
And
to
8
this
years
day?
later, 8 years later, I'm still keeping that promise.
Wow. So tell us about your, like, how did you do it? You know, like some people just stop. Some people use the 12-step fellowships. Some, you know, what was your strategy? What was the modality that worked for you?
I wouldn't super say I had a strategy. I was just kind of going with it. But now I was lucky enough to be clean already when I got pregnant because I was in prison and then in the halfway house. I had a year of sobriety under my belt when I got pregnant. But I feel like what kept me there was putting my foot down on the pedal and moving forward in my life at full speed. I just did everything that I could to build my life. And the more that I found success and the more that I did things that I was proud of and the more that I built a life that I wanted to keep, the less I wanted to relapse.
So, like, you spent 6 years in school as a single parent in recovery. Like, surely there are some lessons in there that you could share with us.
Oh my goodness.
Like,
That was a rough 6 years.
I bet, you know, I was a single father for a year and a half, and I got my son back when I was 6 months in recovery. And you know, they say get a plant in your first year, and if you can keep that plant alive, then maybe you can, you know, think about a girlfriend or a boy, whatever, a relationship. In my case, I got a rowdy 3-year-old boy. I have a bit of a soft spot when I, you know, come across people that have parented in early recovery. What were some of the challenges that you faced early on as a parent in recovery?
Yeah, we skipped the plant portion and went straight to the human.
Me too.
Me too.
I think my biggest thing was becoming really overwhelmed. I mean, when you're in addiction, you're in a high-paced, high adrenaline lifestyle, right? And you're doing whatever you want to do all day, every day. And then all of a sudden, I was responsible for somebody else. And I went from that high-paced lifestyle to going to work and taking care of my child and going to school, and that was it. That was it all the time. And I began to feel very overwhelmed with that responsibility. And that overwhelmedness was, I don't think that's a word, but
It
that
is
was
now.
my biggest trigger back then.
I think we made up 2 words in
Definitely.
last week's show. So, yeah. So yeah, I mean, like, for me, I wanted to blame my son's behavior, but he's 3. So it wasn't for me. It wasn't necessarily my son's behavior. It was my behavior. It was the way that I responded to that behavior. You know, and I yelled too loud, and I said some words I shouldn't, and maybe sometimes I still, you know, yell a little louder than I should. But like, what changed for you? So not only were you in school and being a full-time parent, but you were also working, and that's when you were working at the factory and as a waitress too, right? So you're doing
Yes.
all of these things, and like, how did you cope? Like, with, you know, doing 2 jobs that you don't like, and you're in school, which is hard, and being a parent, and how many children did you have at the time?
Just one at that time. I have 3 now, just one back then.
Yeah. So, like, what were some of the ways that, I mean, you've already told us a little bit about how you, you know, moving forward in your life is what has helped you the most so far. But like when things got real dark, when things got really hard, like where did your thoughts go? Like where and how did you intervene on those thoughts?
I mean, obviously, I thought about throwing in the towel at times. I thought it would be easier to go back to a life where I didn't have to care or worry about any of these things. I thought that maybe I'm not good enough to be a parent. I thought maybe my sister or somebody else could maybe do a better job than I
Mm,
could. But I couldn't leave him. I just couldn't do that to him. You know what I mean?
mm,
So I just had to keep pushing through it no matter what. And I had a lot of really hard nights. And the thing that I did that kind of helped my soul the most at that time was I spent a lot of time in nature. I spent a lot of time solo hiking. I went backpacking. I meditated a lot. I tried to really build that connection with myself and with my world. And I feel like that was really, really beneficial for me at that time.
mhm,
That is something that gave me a little bit of peace.
mm. So what about your family along the way here? You know, you mentioned your sister there. Has she been a support for you?
Definitely. My family's been a really big support. Um, I'm not handed things, you know. I remember at one point my sister said to me, I'm not your baby daddy. Like I had asked her for help with my children, you know, and she's like,
Mhm,
I'm not your baby daddy. I was like, okay, I will figure it out.
mhm.
Um, but they are always there when I really, really need them. Yes.
So,
But yeah, I think when you're in that single parenting boat, there's sometimes when you're just alone.
yeah, ain't that the truth? I remember when I was there was one time in particular when I had my son and he got a cough, and I was living not in a halfway house but in a sober living facility, and you know there was social workers on staff, and we weren't allowed to give him any cough medication because he was too young. And you know, oftentimes you talk to experienced parents and you say you get this stuff for 6 year olds and you give them half of that, and then you know that helps. And but I wasn't allowed to have any of that, and he was coughing and coughing and coughing, and like I felt so helpless. You know, like there was just, and there was no one there to really help me. And like the windows were like, I had so much water in the house from the, you know, boiling water trying to get humidity in the air. Do you ever have anything like that happen?
Yeah, I had a lot of moments where my son was not an easy baby.
Mm,
He was a crier. I think he maybe had some acid reflux, so he was crying all the time, except when he was being held, pretty much. So I definitely had moments where like I need to get my homework done and I need to go to work and I need to do this and I can't do anything but hold this baby. And that's when I reached out for help. I reached out. I remember texting everybody in my family one day. I texted my parents, my cousin, my sister. I was like, can anybody come and help me? And not one person showed up. Not one person came, you know? So those moments show you what you're made of, I guess.
yeah, that's a fact. Um, so tell us a little bit about your journey into being a therapist. Um, Now I understand you're practicing, you're under supervision, but tell us how your experiences, like your lived experiences, help you reach the people that you're serving.
I feel like I knew right away when I got clean because when I was in active addiction, I remember feeling like I was never getting out of this. I remember accepting that I was going to be an addict for the rest of my life, and I was okay with that. So the fact that I am here today, it surprises me and amazes me every single day. And so that is what made me realize that I need to help other people realize that they are not stuck there either, like I thought I was.
Mhm.
It's not the end of the road. And so I think that I'm able to connect with people in a way that a lot of other professionals are not. So I'm able to help people through my experience and also through my education as well. And I kind of combine that in what I do. And I focus largely on addiction, obviously, and generational trauma and breaking that cycle.
Generational trauma. You know what? Before we go any further, let's just take a quick break and grab a drink of water here. And let me tell our viewers and listeners that tonight's episode is also brought to you in part by Prairie Harm Reduction in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and Prairie Sky Recovery Center in Leipzig, Saskatchewan. To learn more about our sponsors, get on our email list, check out our upcoming live and interactive streams like this one and more. Check out www.hardknoxtalks.com while you're there. Check out our merch. It's amazing, and it helps us keep the lights on. So tell me a little bit more about, like, 'cause you didn't grow up in a active alcoholism or addiction type environment. So how did your parents respond when these things started happening to you, or you started using? Did they notice right away? Did they shrug it off? Did they turn the other cheek?
I think they were in denial for a little bit, but they were very scared. They really didn't have any idea what to do. They are actually the ones that gave me my first charge
Oh no.
because they didn't know how to help me.
Mhm.
So they were worried. They wanted me to be safe. You know what I mean? So they thought that that might be the right route. Yeah. So they definitely struggled to learn how to accept that. But they got better with it. They went to Al-Anon and they got support and they understood more about how things worked and how you can support people in a healthy way, not enable and all that good stuff.
And how many times did you try to quit? Like, how many times did you, oh, I'm done now, I'm good now? Like, did you ever do that?
Oh gosh. I think I went to every treatment available. I went to inpatient, I think 4 different times. I did Suboxone doctors. I did the methadone clinic. I did a hospitalized detox. I tried to detox myself. I detoxed in jail. I did all of it.
Mhm.
So I
And
don't know, like 27,
27 times, give or
maybe.
take.
Yeah. Yeah.
We want to talk about breaking like family cycles and things like that. Was it different for you the last time? Like, did it take a long time for your parents to, and your family in general for that, to come to trust you, to come to let you in again?
Oh, for sure. Yes. I was not a good person in my active addiction.
Mhm.
I hurt people. I stole from people. I really did a number on everybody. So yeah, they definitely hid their purses for a while when we were in the same room. Um, Today I have keys to all of their houses and they leave their purse right out in the open every time. So
That happened to me.
big improvement.
That happened to me a little while ago, actually, and it probably happened to me lots before this. But I noticed it about 8 months ago. I went for lunch with my mom, and she went to the bathroom and left her purse at the table, and it sort of stood out to me, because like she wouldn't trust me with anything either back in the day, And it took a number of years before you could see the fear come out of their eyes. Were you mad at them at first for not trusting you? Were you like, I got 3 weeks clean, why aren't you trusting me yet?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Because you make that change in your head, but they don't see that on the outside yet.
Mhm.
So my sister and I used to argue all the time because she would bring things up that I did, and I would be like that, like I'm clean now. That doesn't even apply anymore.
Yeah.
But really, I had been clean for like a week. So yeah.
Mhm.
The more that they saw that changed behavior and saw me start to make my own success in life, the more that changed.
Mhm. Yeah, and it just takes time. Do you work with, like, now, do you work with families? Like, what is the scope of what is the scope of your therapy? Just so that I can ask you the right questions.
So therapy wise, I can only practice in Indiana right now, but I do work with both families and individuals. I also provide recovery support services and family consultations for people. So if a parent or a spouse of an addict does not know what to do, they don't know how to process this situation, I will kind of walk through that with them, and we will have a phone consultation and talk about how they can help and how they can take care of themselves and all of that.
I really wanted to unpack the cycles of like breaking cycles of family. Now, what does that mean?
Generational trauma essentially is when a family goes through a sort of trauma, which could be substance use or a death in the family, or it could be a number of things. Trauma is often not what you think it is. It's not necessarily like being beat and things like that. It can be a lot of different things. It's that trauma then impacts, their children and their children's lifestyle and habits. And then those bad habits and cycles get passed on to the next generation and the next generation. So let's say we have a family where the dad is an extreme alcoholic and he beat the children growing up, and the mom just kind of sat back and did her thing. And the children grew up to be addicts as well, in and out of jail and struggling to function as normal adults. And then their children will do the same thing, grow up in addiction and struggle to function over and over again until somebody breaks that cycle.
Here I was thinking more of like a behavioral thing. Like when we get sober, sometimes we think that we can go back to our loved ones, even though they're still in rough places, or, like go back to your ex, or go back to your baby daddy, or go back to family that are still living a toxic lifestyle. Did you ever experience anything like that in all of the times you were trying to find recovery?
Yeah, and it is that too. And that's when I started working in the field. I realized that my family tended to be the minority. I met so many people who, they got high with their parents, and I realized what a huge issue that was. That's one of the main things also that I feel like kept me clean, was kind of isolating myself. Not that isolation is healthy, but separating myself from everybody that I used to hang out with. But you do absolutely go through that phase where you want that connection. And when you start using, you lose like all of your original friends that you had. And then when you stop using, you lose all your using friends. So then you're left with nobody, and you're in sobriety with nobody, and you want that connection. And so it is very tempting to reach out to those old people. Or if you are in a relationship where you got clean, but your spouse or whoever did not, and you still want to stay with them. I have been in that situation as well. And
that was Donna and I for a number of years.
yeah.
So we've got a roller coaster of a journey together, her and I. You have to push the button.
I was just laughing, but yeah, I mean, when you say roller coaster, that's a bit of an understatement. It'd be like the world's craziest, biggest attraction or something.
Yeah. But here we are now in our little sunroom on the side of our little rental property, live streaming all over the world. Yeah.
It all worked out.
So far, yeah.
And despite living in the shadows for many of our years together, now we're like out in the open. Like I was just kind of bagging down earlier today that it's like living with the paparazzi because our whole fucking life's on display.
I'm taking pictures of food and Christmas trees and kids doing things and just blasting it all over the internet. And she's like, Bjork likes to punch people out for taking pictures of her kids, right? So yeah. How long was it for you, Tracy, when you entered recovery and you got away from the lifestyle and from the old playmates and play places, so they say? How long was it until you started building healthy relationships, just like in the community, like just like getting some healthy friends and things like that?
Honestly, I still struggle with that a little bit because I was a single parent and I was working and going to school, I was very busy and I never had a lot of childcare. So I didn't make a whole lot of friends. I spent a lot of my time in early recovery on my own, and I still spend a lot of time on my own. I would say though, like probably a couple years in when I started getting better jobs and whatnot, because also when I was waitressing, the majority of people that I worked with were people who were in active addiction as well. So I think once I started to get jobs like in the mental health field and whatnot, and meeting people who were more in a similar place where I was, that's when I was able to start making those relationships.
Mhm. I tried early on. 'Cause I'm a program guy. I went to detox, I went to treatment, and then like I just like dove headfirst into the program. And I'm glad I did, and I still go to meetings sometimes, but like I tried to force friendships. I tried to like have a lot of friends. I tried to be in this crowd or in that crowd. And like even being a single father, like I did get some respite. I was able to go to meetings and sometimes even for coffee after a meeting. But it was
No.
I did. No, that took time. Like there was like a probably a year there where like I was always like I can't go for coffee. I got to go home. And like but that's
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we laugh now, but at the time, like that's heavy. We're trying to like
I'm
heal.
still that person. Yeah.
So, but it's tough. Looking back now, I don't really know how I coped with that. I just sort of I did you get heavy into social media?
Not really.
Really?
I remember I joined a mom group and I tried to like be active in the mom group.
Mm-hmm.
That was the extent of my like socialization.
Mm-hmm. See, I tried. Yeah. My Facebook is problematic. I'm not gonna lie. It's always been like, and that was the only way that I could really socialize. And as you can see, like I love having conversations. Like I'm very boisterous. I'm very like wanting to go back and forth with people. So, and that was really the only outlet that I had for a long time. Because I had my son and he needed me, and that's amazing. And who's to say that I would have gotten as far as I did without him? Do you think your kids saved you?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of almost hate to say that because it's not his job to do that,
Big
but
burden to carry.
yeah, he absolutely did.
Mm-hmm. So you have 3 kids now. Tell us about that. Like you met someone in recovery and that was a good thing, and like tell us about what that was like getting into your first relationship in recovery. Was it scary? Like did you like not know what to do?
That was probably my first real relationship. You know what I mean? All of my other relationships were fully centered around using. So that
Mm-hmm.
was my first one where we actually probably went out on dates and did normal human things.
Yeah. So were you
Um,
were you were you like, so have you ever been to prison?
but it was someone from back in the day who had been to prison multiple times.
Oh.
So, yeah. But no, that didn't end up working out because they ended up relapsing.
Oh no.
And so, yeah, that is why I am still single parenting.
Mm-hmm. It's tough. They say stay single for it, they when I say they, I mean like the people that I was spending time with early on, and that was the program, and a lot of them said stay single for a year, and I didn't listen at first, and at 90 days I got into a relationship, and that went very very wrong, like very fast, and that was like touching a hot stove, and I learned, like believe it or not, at 90 days sober, I learned something. And then I stayed single for like I think like a year and a half. I just honestly like I found peace in myself. Like I did. I became comfortable with who I was. And then things fell into place, and Donna's here today. So,
For
yeah.
the record, I stayed single for the 3 and some years.
Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Donna, yeah, like Wild story.
What exactly would you like to know?
I don't know. Nothing.
that I like reclused and just focused on Kendra and rebuilding my relationship with Graydon.
Mm-hmm.
That was that, and with my parents as well. So
Mhm.
yeah, I really focused on those really close connections.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and then the pandemic hit, so that kind of made staying away from people a little bit easy and normal.
Yes. Tracy, tell us about your experience with the pandemic. Was
I
it?
kind of love it. I'm not the pandemic in general. That's awful. I don't
Yeah.
love that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm very much an introvert and I like being at home. So
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was pretty great to always have an excuse to not be around
Oh yeah,
people.
no,
I
Dad,
am
we don't.
I am totally with Tracy on that. I for once in my life felt normal to not want to leave the house.
Right. Oh, I can't. We got
Yeah,
kids. We can't get COVID.
yeah.
My work also became remote at that time. So I started working from home, which was extremely helpful as well.
Mm-hmm. Extremely helpful in what way? In just like being able to like be in your own space and safe, so to speak, or.
Work-life balance, probably, because
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely a struggle, getting up and going to a 9 to 5 every day when you're also a single parent who's got
Mm-hmm.
kids who are getting sick every other
Oh
day and
man.
can't go to daycare.
We're
So,
in that. We're in that right now, actually. Like I personally
really,
have been, I feel like I've been sick for a year. Like seriously, like I don't know, like right about May, I just started getting sick, but especially when school went back in after summer, I have been like sick and the kid, like there's been one kid home every week, like for months,
yes,
and like
yep,
how does a single parent even like hold down a job if they're expected to show up, you know what I mean? Like at a 9 to 5 or whatever. Like I don't know, man.
right. I
Yeah.
know. I don't think I could ever go back to being full-time in an office at this point now that I have
Mm-hmm.
3 children.
Mm-hmm.
It takes me like 3 hours to get out the door every single day.
Yeah. No, and like the same thing here. Like boots, jacket. Put your boots on. Put your boots on. Put put your boots on. Put your jacket. Then you start like trying to like reason with them, like we need to go. Like there's been times like not lately, but in the past where like I've like gotten so angry that I just like we're going outside now, and they go outside in their socks, and then they don't argue about boots anymore for a while.
Right.
Yeah. So I think we're coming to the end here. I think we touched on everything we wanted to touch on. Is there anything that we missed, or is there anything you'd like to leave us with tonight?
I would just say if you are in early recovery and you are struggling to get to a place where you are happy or content with where you're at in life, don't take no for an answer. I feel like a lot of people get stuck in their recovery and they settle for a life that they are not happy with because you think that you are not worthy of good things, or you think that you can't have whatever because of your criminal history or whatever. And so you just stay stuck in this existence or this job or this house or relationship that you're not happy with. And what I've really learned is just that, yes, things are harder for us as addicts and felons, but they are not impossible. There truly are still no limits. We can still do anything that we want to do and anything that we had wanted to do from the beginning. So if you want to have a certain career, don't take no for an answer because this place says that they don't hire felons. Or if you want to get your felonies expunged, don't take no for an answer on that 10-year law. There's always loopholes to everything. So just keep working towards it and don't take no for an answer.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for sharing your experience and your strength and your journey with us. And we'll let you go. Take care, my friend.
All right. Thank you guys. Have a good night.
All right, if you're getting something out of what we are doing here, you can find all our audios on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts, or live and interactive right here on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch TV. Thanks for watching. Take care, and we will see you next time.
Say, this is Hard Knox Talks.